You know, sometimes a single moment can unravel everything you thought you knew about your life. Picture this, a dusty diner on the edge of a small town, the kind of place where the coffee's always bitter and the jukebox hasn't worked in years. It's late, the kind of late where the world feels like it's holding its breath. A man sits alone in a booth, his hair streaked with gray, his hands rough from years of work. He's staring at a photograph, old and creased, of a woman with eyes that seem to carry a secret. Across the room, a young waitress wipes down the counter, her movements slow, her face tired but kind. She glances at him, and something shifts, a flicker of recognition, a shadow of something she shouldn't know. She walks over, her apron stained, her voice soft but steady, and says words that hit him like a freight train. "I know who she is. And I know what you did." His face goes white, the photograph trembling in his hands. He's a father, a man who's spent his life protecting his daughter, Sarah, and the land she's fought to keep. But this waitress, this stranger, knows something that could tear it all apart. How could she? He's never seen her before, never heard her name. Yet her words cut deep, slicing through years of buried guilt and unspoken promises. He stammers, trying to find a response, but his voice fails him. The diner feels smaller, the air thicker, as if the walls themselves are closing in. She doesn't smile, doesn't gloat. She just watches him, her eyes holding a truth he's not ready to face. And in that moment, he knows his world is about to change forever. Let's step back, though, because this story doesn't start here. It starts with Sarah, a woman who's been fighting tooth and nail to save her family's land from developers circling like vultures. She's tough, the kind of tough that comes from losing too much too young, her mother to illness, her brother to a war he never came back from. The land is all she has left, a sprawling stretch of fields and woods that holds her memories like a heartbeat. The town's rallied behind her, neighbors and shopkeepers pitching in to keep the bank at bay. But it's not enough. The debts are piling up, and the developers are relentless, their offers growing sweeter by the day. Sarah's at her breaking point, her hands calloused from work, her heart heavy with the fear that she'll lose the only home she's ever known. That's when he showed up, a drifter named Caleb, a man with no roots and a past he doesn't talk about. He rolled into town on a beat-up motorcycle, his leather jacket worn thin, his eyes carrying a quiet kind of pain. Sarah didn't trust him at first. She'd seen men like him before, passing through, promising help but leaving chaos behind. But Caleb was different. He didn't make grand promises or flash a charming smile. He just worked, hard, steady, like he had something to prove. He fixed fences, cleared brush, even rebuilt the old barn when a storm tore it down. The townsfolk whispered about him, curious but wary, wondering why a man with no ties would stay for a fight that wasn't his. Sarah hired him because she had no choice. The land needed hands, and hers weren't enough anymore. But as the days turned into weeks, something shifted between them. It wasn't love, not at first. It was quieter, deeper, a mutual respect, a shared understanding of what it means to carry a burden alone. Caleb saw the way Sarah poured herself into the land, the way she'd stay up late poring over legal papers, her fingers smudged with ink. And Sarah saw the way Caleb moved, deliberate and careful, like he was afraid of breaking something fragile. They didn't talk much, but when they did, it was real, words that cut through the noise of the world and landed soft, like rain on dry earth. There was one night, under a sky so clear you could see every star, when Sarah found him sitting by the creek that ran through her property. He was whittling a piece of wood, his knife moving with a precision that spoke of years of practice. She sat beside him, not saying anything at first, just listening to the water and the crickets. Then she asked, almost a whisper, why he stayed. Caleb didn't look at her, just kept carving, his hands steady. "Some things are worth fighting for," he said finally, his voice low, like he was afraid the words might break if he said them too loud. She didn't push, didn't ask for more. But that moment stayed with her, a seed planted in soil she hadn't realized was still fertile. The town saw it too, the way they worked side by side, the way Sarah's shoulders seemed a little less tense when Caleb was around. They didn't know his story, didn't need to. They saw a man who showed up when it mattered, who didn't flinch when the developers sent their lawyers or when the bank's letters grew sharper. He wasn't just saving the land, he was saving Sarah, piece by piece, without ever asking for credit. And Sarah, for all her stubborn pride, let him. She didn't know why, not then. Maybe it was the way he listened, really listened, when she talked about her mother's garden or her brother's laugh. Maybe it was the way he never pushed her to be anything but herself. But let's go back to that diner, to the father who's just heard words that turned his world upside down. His name's Henry, and he's not just any father, he's Sarah's father, the one who's watched her fight for the land with a fierceness that both awes and terrifies him. He spent years keeping secrets, not to hurt her, but to protect her from a truth he thought she couldn't bear. The photograph in his hand is of Sarah's mother, a woman he loved more than life itself, a woman whose death left a hole nothing could fill. And now this waitress, this girl who shouldn't know anything, has just ripped that hole wide open. Henry's mind races, trying to piece it together. How could she know? He thinks of Sarah, out there on the land, unaware of the storm brewing. He thinks of Caleb, the drifter who's become more than a hired hand, the man who's changed his daughter in ways Henry can't quite name. There's something about Caleb that's always felt familiar, something Henry's tried to ignore, a cadence in his voice, a shadow in his eyes. And now, with the waitress's words echoing in his ears, Henry's starting to wonder if he's missed something crucial, something that could unravel everything Sarah's fought for. He stands, the photograph still in his hand, and leaves a crumpled bill on the table. The waitress watches him go, her expression unreadable, but there's a weight to her gaze, like she's carrying a burden of her own. Outside, the night is heavy with the promise of rain, the kind that washes away secrets but leaves scars in their place. Henry walks to his truck, his steps uneven, his heart pounding with a fear he hasn't felt in years. He doesn't know what's coming, not yet, but he knows it's tied to Sarah, to Caleb, to the land they're all fighting for. And somewhere, deep down, he knows it's tied to the truth he's kept buried for too long, a truth that started long before Sarah was born, in a time when love was a risk and trust was a luxury he couldn't afford. Let's step back a little further, into the quiet moments before everything changed, when the world still felt like it could hold steady if you just kept pushing. Picture Sarah standing on her porch at dawn, the sky bruised with clouds that hadn't yet decided whether to break into rain. Her hands are wrapped around a chipped mug of coffee, steam curling into the cool air, her eyes scanning the land that's been her anchor and her burden. The fields stretch out before her, golden in patches where the sun dares to break through, but there's a heaviness in her chest, a knowing that this might be one of the last mornings she can call this place hers. The developer's letters are piling up on her kitchen table, each one a little more insistent, a little less patient. She's fought them for years, leaned on every neighbor and friend in town, but the weight of it all is starting to feel like too much for one person to carry. That's where Caleb comes in, though he's not the kind of man you'd expect to change a story like this. He's been working for her for a few weeks now, ever since she found him fixing a neighbor's tractor and offered him a job out of desperation. He doesn't talk much about himself, doesn't offer stories or excuses, just shows up every morning with his tools and a quiet focus that's almost unsettling. Sarah watches him from the porch sometimes, like she's doing now, as he hammers stakes into a fence line, his movements precise, almost reverent, like he's not just fixing wood but stitching together something broken inside himself. She wonders about him, about the scars on his knuckles and the way he avoids questions about where he's from. But she doesn't ask, not yet. There's something about his silence that feels like a boundary, and Sarah's learned enough about loss to respect that. They've fallen into a rhythm, the two of them. She'll point out what needs doing, clear the ditch, patch the roof, and he'll nod, get to work, no complaints. But it's more than that. There's a moment every day, small but steady, where their paths cross in a way that feels different. Like yesterday, when she handed him a glass of water and their fingers brushed, just for a second, and she felt a warmth she hadn't known she could still feel. Or the day before, when he caught her staring at the old oak tree her brother used to climb, and instead of asking why, he just stood there with her, sharing the silence like it was enough. These moments don't mean anything, she tells herself. They're just two people trying to keep a sinking ship afloat. But deep down, she knows better. The towns noticed it too, though they're too polite to say it outright. At the general store, old Mrs. Carter raises an eyebrow when Sarah mentions Caleb's name, a knowing smile tugging at her lips. The mechanic down the road jokes that Caleb's motorcycle hasn't broken down once since he started working for Sarah, like the land's keeping him tethered. They see the way he carries himself, steady and unyielding, and they see the way Sarah started to lean on him, not just for the work but for something harder to name. It's not love, not yet, maybe not ever, but it's trust, and in a town like this, trust is rarer than gold. But let's go back to that diner for a moment, to Henry, Sarah's father, who's driving away from that unsettling encounter with the waitress. His hands grip the steering wheel too tight, the photograph of Sarah's mother still burning a hole in his pocket. He's trying to make sense of what just happened, but his mind keeps circling back to that girl's words, "I know who she is. And I know what you did." They're like a splinter under his skin, sharp and impossible to ignore. He thinks of Sarah, out there fighting for the land, and he thinks of Caleb, the man who's become a fixture in her life. There's something about Caleb that's been nagging at him, a familiarity he can't place, like a song you half remember but can't name. Henry's always been protective of Sarah, maybe too much. After her mother died, he poured everything into keeping her safe, shielding her from the parts of his past he thought would hurt her. He's made mistakes, God knows he has, but he's done it all for her. The land, the fight, the secrets he's kept, they're all part of that promise. But now, with the waitress's words ringing in his ears, he's starting to wonder if those secrets are about to come undone. He pulls over, the truck's engine idling, and takes out the photograph. Sarah's mother stares back at him, her smile soft but piercing, like she's asking him to finally face the truth. Back at the farm, Sarah's finishing her coffee when Caleb calls her over to the barn. "He's found something," he says, his voice calm but edged with something she can't quite read. She follows him inside, the air cool and thick with the smell of hay and old wood. He points to a box tucked in a corner, half buried under a tarp. It's old, the kind of thing her father might have stored away and forgotten. She kneels beside it, her fingers brushing the dusty lid, and feels a strange pull, like she's about to uncover something she wasn't meant to find. Caleb stands back, watching her, his face unreadable but his eyes sharp, like he knows more than he's saying. She opens the box, and inside is a tangle of papers, letters, mostly, yellowed with age, and a small, tarnished locket she's never seen before. The letters are in her mother's handwriting, addressed to someone Sarah doesn't recognize. She scans the first one, her heart quickening, and catches a name that makes her pause. It's not her father's. It's not anyone she knows. But there's something about it, a weight that settles in her chest, like she's standing on the edge of a truth she's not ready to face. She looks up at Caleb, expecting him to say something, but he's quiet, his gaze fixed on the locket in her hand. And in that moment, she wonders if he's here for more than just the land, if he's carrying a secret of his own, one that's about to collide with hers. Let's linger for a moment on that barn, where Sarah's kneeling in the dust, the open box before her spilling secrets she wasn't prepared to find. The locket in her hand feels heavier than it should, its tarnished surface catching the faint light filtering through the barn's slatted walls. She runs her thumb over it, tracing the faint engraving, a single initial, E, that doesn't belong to anyone she knows. The letters beneath her fingers are a whisper from a past she thought she understood, her mother's handwriting looping across the pages in a way that feels both familiar and foreign. She hasn't read them yet, not really, just caught that name, one that doesn't match her father's, and it's enough to make her stomach twist. Caleb standing a few feet away, his shadow long across the hay-strewn floor, and she can feel his eyes on her, steady but guarded, like he's waiting for her to decide what comes next. She doesn't look at him, not yet. Instead, she tucks the locket into her pocket, the weight of it pressing against her hip, and gathers the letters into a bundle. They're fragile, the paper brittle under her touch, and she's careful, almost reverent, as if they might crumble if she moves too fast. There's a part of her that wants to tear through them right now, to read every word and unravel the mystery of that name, but another part, the part that's carried her through years of loss and struggle, tells her to wait. Whatever's in these letters, it's not just a story about her mother. It's a door, and once she opens it, there's no going back. She stands, brushing the dust from her jeans, and finally meets Caleb's gaze. He hasn't moved, hasn't spoken, but there's something in his expression, a flicker of understanding, maybe, or a shadow of his own ghosts, that makes her pause. "You ever find something you wish you hadn't?" she asks, her voice quieter than she meant it to be. He doesn't answer right away, just shifts his weight, his hands slipping into his pockets. "Sometimes," he says finally, his tone low, like he's choosing his words carefully. "But sometimes it's not about what you find. It's about what you do with it." She nods, not sure if she agrees but feeling the truth of it settle somewhere deep. They leave the barn together, the box left behind for now, and step into the morning light. The air's crisp, carrying the scent of damp earth and pine, and Sarah feels it like a balm, soothing the unease that's taken root inside her. She walks toward the house, Caleb a step behind, and her mind drifts to her father, Henry, who's out there somewhere, carrying his own weight. She thinks about calling him, telling him about the box, but something stops her. Maybe it's the way he's been lately, distant, his eyes clouded with a worry he won't name. Or maybe it's the locket, that single "e" burning a question into her heart. Henry, meanwhile, is miles away, sitting in his truck outside the diner where the waitress turned his world upside down. The photograph of Sarah's mother is still in his hand, its edges worn from years of being carried, hidden, cherished. He's replaying the waitress's words, trying to make sense of them. "I know who she is. And I know what you did." They're like a riddle, sharp and unrelenting, and he's starting to wonder if the truth he's kept buried for so long is finally clawing its way out. He thinks of Sarah, of the land she's fighting for, and he thinks of Caleb, the drifter who's become a part of her life in a way Henry didn't expect. There's something about Caleb that's been nagging at him, a familiarity he can't shake, and now, with the waitress's words echoing, it's starting to feel like more than coincidence. He starts the engine, the truck rumbling to life, and heads toward the farm. He needs to see Sarah, to make sure she's okay, to gauge whether she's sensed the storm that's coming. He doesn't know about the box yet, doesn't know about the locket or the letters, but he feels it, a shift in the air, like the world's tilting toward a reckoning. As he drives, the photograph slips from his hand, landing on the passenger seat, and he glances at it, his wife's face a reminder of the choices he made, the ones he thought were for love but might have been for fear. Back at the farm, Sarah's in the kitchen, the letters spread out on the table like a map she's not sure she wants to follow. Caleb's outside, working on the tractor, giving her space she didn't ask for but needs. She picks up the first letter, her hands steady despite the tremor in her chest, and starts to read. Her mother's words are vivid, full of a life Sarah only half remembers, a woman who laughed easily, who loved fiercely, who wrote about a man who wasn't Henry. The name appears again, Eli, and it's like a stone dropping into still water, rippling through everything Sarah thought she knew. Her mother writes of meeting him by chance, of conversations that stretched into the night, of a connection that felt like fate but came too late. Sarah stops reading, her breath catching. She doesn't know who Eli is, doesn't know if he's the "E" on the locket, but she feels the ground shifting beneath her. She thinks of her father, of the stories he's told about her mother, always careful, always measured. She thinks of Caleb, too, and the way he seems to carry a piece of her family's past in his silence. There's a moment where she wonders if she's imagining it, if grief and stress are weaving connections that aren't there. But then she touches the locket in her pocket, and the weight of it tells her otherwise. She steps outside, needing air, needing something to anchor her. Caleb's still by the tractor, his shirt damp with sweat, and he looks up as she approaches. "You okay?" he asks, and it's the first time he's asked her something so direct. She doesn't answer, just stands there, the locket in her hand, and for a moment, she feels like she's standing on the edge of a cliff, the truth waiting below. She wants to ask him if he knows more than he's letting on, if he's tied to her family in ways she hasn't guessed. But the words don't come, not yet. Instead, she holds his gaze, searching for answers in the lines of his face, and finds only a quiet strength that makes her want to keep looking. The morning light softens as Sarah stands there, the locket still warm in her palm, its symbol engraved, E, like a question that won't let her go. Caleb's watching her, his hands paused on the tractor's engine, grease smudged across his knuckles. She feels the weight of his gaze, not pressing but steady, like he's giving her room to decide whether to speak or stay silent. She wants to ask him something, anything, about the locket, about the letters, about why his presence feels like it's tugging at threads she didn't know were loose. But her throat tightens, and instead, she slips the locket back into her pocket, the metal cool against her skin. "Just needed some air," she says, her voice thinner than she'd like, and he nods, turning back to his work as if he knows she's not ready to share the storm brewing inside her. She heads back to the house, the letters waiting on the kitchen table like a challenge she's not sure she can meet. She hasn't read more than that first one, hasn't dared to dive deeper into her mother's words about this man named Eli, but they're already shifting the shape of her memories. Her mother was always a fixed point in her mind, loving, steadfast, bound to her father in a way that seemed unbreakable. But these letters, with their quiet confessions of late-night talks and fleeting moments, suggest a different story, one that makes Sarah feel like she's trespassing on sacred ground. She sits, her fingers hovering over the pages, and wonders what it means to love someone who loved someone else, even for a moment. Outside, the day moves on, the sounds of Caleb's tools blending with the rustle of leaves in the wind. Sarah tries to focus on the tasks at hand, bills to pay, calls to make about the land, but her mind keeps drifting back to the locket, to that name, to the way her father's been carrying himself lately, like a man bracing for a blow. She thinks about calling him, but the thought of his voice, heavy with the weight of whatever he's not saying, stops her. Instead, she picks up another letter, her mother's handwriting pulling her in like a current. This one's shorter, more urgent, describing a night by the creek where Eli spoke of leaving town, of a life he couldn't have. Her mother's words are laced with regret, not for what was, but for what might have been, and Sarah feels a pang of something she can't name, grief, maybe, or fear that the past isn't as settled as she thought. She's so lost in the letter that she doesn't hear the truck pull up, doesn't notice until the screen door creaks and her father steps inside. Henry's face is drawn, his eyes shadowed, the photograph of her mother still tucked in his pocket like a secret he can't let go. He sees the letters on the table, and for a moment, his expression falters, a flicker of panic crossing his features before he smooths it away. "Didn't expect to find you here," he says, his voice rough, like he's been arguing with himself all the way over. Sarah looks up, the letter still in her hand, and feels a surge of questions she's not sure she's ready to ask. "Just going through some things," she says, her tone careful, watching him for any sign of what he's hiding. Henry nods, but his eyes linger on the letters, and she can tell he recognizes them, even from across the room. He doesn't move closer, just stands there, his hands shoved deep in his pockets, like he's afraid of what might happen if he gets too near. "Found those in the barn?" he asks, and there's a weight to the question, a knowing that makes her heart skip. She nods, not trusting herself to say more, and the silence between them grows thick, heavy with things neither of them is ready to name. She wants to ask about Eli, about the locket, about why her mother wrote letters to a man who wasn't her father, but the words feel too big, too dangerous, like they might break something she can't fix. Instead, she asks, "You okay, Dad?" It's a simple question, but it lands like a stone, and she sees the way his shoulders tense, the way his jaw tightens just enough to betray him. "Just tired," he says, but it's a lie, and they both know it. He steps toward the table, hesitates, then picks up one of the letters, his fingers trembling slightly. He doesn't read it, just holds it, like it's a piece of his past he's not sure he can face. "Your mother loved this place," he says, almost to himself, and Sarah feels a pang of guilt for digging into something that clearly still hurts him. But there's no going back now, not with that name echoing in her mind, not with the locket burning a hole in her pocket. Henry sets the letter down, his movements slow, and looks at her, really looks at her, like he's searching for something in her face. "You've been carrying a lot," he says, "and it's not just about the land," she knows it. She wants to tell him about the letters, about Eli, about the questions piling up like storm clouds, but before she can, there's a knock at the door. It's Caleb, his shirt dusted with sawdust, his expression unreadable. "Tractor's done," he says, but his eyes flick to Henry, then to the letters, and Sarah catches a fleeting tension, like he's walked into a moment he wasn't meant to see. Henry nods at Caleb, but there's a stiffness in it, a wariness Sarah hasn't noticed before. She wonders if it's because of the letters, or because of something else, something tied to that diner, to the waitress who shook him so badly he's still not himself. Caleb lingers for a moment, his gaze settling on Sarah, and she feels it again, that pull, like he knows more than he's saying, like he's waiting for her to connect dots she hasn't even seen yet. "I'll be out back," he says finally, and turns to go, but not before his hand brushes the doorframe, a small, deliberate gesture that feels like a promise he hasn't made out loud. Sarah watches him leave, the letters still spread before her, her father's silence a weight she can't ignore. She's standing at a crossroads, the past and present colliding in ways she can't yet understand, and all she knows is that the truth is closer than it's ever been, and more dangerous than she ever imagined. The air in the kitchen feels heavier now, like it's holding its breath after Caleb's departure. Sarah's still at the table, the letters scattered like pieces of a puzzle she's not sure she wants to solve. Her father, Henry, hasn't moved from his spot by the door, his hands still deep in his pockets, his eyes avoiding the bundle of papers that seem to pulse with a life of their own. She can feel the distance between them, not just physical but something deeper, a chasm widened by the secrets they're both circling but not naming. The locket's still in her pocket, its weight a constant reminder of the name, Eli, that's been echoing in her mind since she opened that box in the barn. She wants to ask her father about it, to demand answers, but there's a fragility in his posture, a crack in the man she's always seen as unbreakable, and it makes her hesitate. She picks up another letter, more to fill the silence than anything else, and glances at the words, her mother's handwriting a tether to a woman she's starting to feel she never really knew. This one's different, less wistful, more resolute, as if her mother was making a choice. It talks about saying goodbye to Eli, about choosing the life she had with Henry, with Sarah, with the land. But there's a line that catches Sarah's eye, a sentence that feels like a confession, asterisk, "I'll always carry a piece of you, but I can't let it break what I've built." Asterisk Sarah's breath hitches, and she looks up at her father, who's watching her now, his face a mask of something she can't quite read, guilt, maybe, or fear. "Dad," she starts, her voice soft but steady, "who's Eli?" The question lands like a stone in a still pond, ripples spreading through the room. Henry's jaw tightens, and for a moment, she thinks he won't answer, that he'll deflect or walk away like he's done so many times before. But then he exhales, a long, ragged breath, and steps closer to the table, his hands finally leaving his pockets. "Where'd you hear that name?" he asks, but it's not a question, it's a plea, like he's hoping she'll back away from the edge they're both standing on. She doesn't. She pulls the locket from her pocket, holds it up, the E catching the light. This was with Mom's letters. And his name's in them. Who is he? Henry's eyes lock on the locket, and she sees it, a flicker of recognition, a shadow of something he's buried deep. He doesn't take it, doesn't reach for it, just stares like it's a ghost he thought he'd outrun. "Eli was someone your mother knew," he says finally, his voice low, each word measured like he's walking through a minefield. "A long time ago, before you were born. He didn't stay. It's not enough, and Sarah knows it." She sets the locket down, her fingers lingering on it, and shakes her head. "That's not what the letters say. She loved him, didn't she? At least for a little while." The words feel like a betrayal, but they're out now, hanging between them, and she can't take them back. Henry's face crumples, just for a second, before he catches himself. "Your mother loved me," he says, and there's a fierceness in it, a desperation that makes Sarah's chest ache. She chose me. She chose us. Whatever was in those letters, it's the past. It's done. But it's not done, not for Sarah, not when the locket's sitting there like a question mark, not when her father's voice cracks on the word, done. She wants to push, to demand more, but there's a knock at the door again, sharp and insistent, and it breaks the moment like glass. It's Caleb, back from the field, his boots muddy, his expression unreadable as he steps inside. He glances between Sarah and Henry, sensing the tension, and hesitates, like he's intruded on something private. "Sorry," he says, his voice low. "Just wanted to let you know the fence is holding. Storm's coming tonight, might want to check the barn." Sarah nods, grateful for the interruption but also frustrated, like she's been pulled back from a truth she was close to grasping. Henry, though, seems relieved, his shoulders loosening as he turns to Caleb. "Good work," he says, but there's an edge to it, a scrutiny Sarah hasn't noticed before, like he's looking at Caleb and seeing something, or someone, else. Caleb doesn't react, just nods and steps back toward the door, but not before his eyes meet Sarah's. There's something in them, a flicker of understanding, like he knows what it's like to carry questions you're afraid to ask. She thinks of the barn, of the box they found together, and wonders again if he's tied to this in ways she hasn't guessed. "You staying for dinner?" she asks, almost without thinking, and it's the first time she's invited him to stay beyond the work. He pauses, surprised, then shakes his head. "Got some things to take care of," he says, but his voice is softer than usual, like he's leaving room for a maybe. He's gone before she can say more, the door closing quietly behind him. Henry watches him go, his expression unreadable, and Sarah feels a surge of frustration. "Dad, what's going on with you?" she asks, sharper than she meant. "You're acting like Caleb's done something wrong, like you're waiting for him to slip up." Henry's eyes snap to hers, and for a moment, she thinks he'll tell her, about the diner, the waitress, the photograph that's still in his pocket. But he just shakes his head, his voice tired. "I'm just looking out for you, Sarah. That's all I've ever done." It's not enough, and she knows it, but before she can press, he's moving toward the door, muttering something about checking the barn himself. She's alone again, the letters and locket staring up at her, and she feels like she's standing in the middle of a storm she can't see. Her mother's words, her father's silences, Caleb's quiet presence, they're all pieces of something larger, something that's been hidden for too long. She picks up the locket, opens it this time, and finds a tiny photograph inside, a man she doesn't recognize, but whose eyes feel hauntingly familiar. She doesn't know it yet, but she's closer to the truth than she's ever been, and the answers are waiting, just out of reach, in the choices her father made and the man who's been fixing her fences. The kitchen is quiet now, too quiet, the kind of stillness that feels like it's waiting for something to break. Sarah sits at the table, the locket open in her hand, the tiny photograph inside staring back at her, a man with eyes that seem to hold a story she can't yet read. The "E" on the locket feels like a key, but to what, she doesn't know. Her mother's letters are still spread out before her, their words weaving a past that's both hers and not hers, a life her mother lived before Sarah was even a thought. She's read more since her father left for the barn, each letter pulling her deeper into a time when her mother was young, reckless, caught in a moment of love that wasn't meant to last. Eli's name appears again and again, not as a villain or a hero, but as a man who changed her mother in ways Sarah's only beginning to understand. She closes the locket, the soft click grounding her, and leans back in her chair, her mind racing. Her father's reaction earlier, his refusal to say more, the way his hands shook when he saw the letters, tells her there's more to this than an old fling. And then there's Caleb, who's been orbiting her life like a shadow, fixing things, staying close but never too close, his silence both a comfort and a question. She thinks of the way he looked at her in the barn, when they found the box, like he was seeing something in her he recognized but wouldn't name. It's starting to feel like everyone around her knows more than they're saying, like she's the last piece of a puzzle they're all trying to protect, or hide. The screen door creaks, and she looks up to see Caleb stepping inside, his jacket slung over one shoulder, his face dusted with the day's work. He hesitates when he sees her, the letters, the locket, like he's walked into a moment he shouldn't. "Forgot my wrench," he says, nodding toward the counter, but his eyes linger on the table, on the open letter in her hand. She doesn't move to hide it, doesn't know why, just watches him as he crosses the room, his boots soft against the worn floor. There's a moment where she could let him leave, let the silence between them stay unbroken, but something in her, maybe the locket, maybe the letters, pushes her to speak. "You ever lose someone and wish you could ask them one more thing?" she says, her voice low, almost lost in the hum of the evening. Caleb stops, his hand on the wrench, and turns to face her. His expression doesn't change, but there's a shift in his eyes, a softening that makes her heart catch. "Yeah," he says, simple but heavy, like he's carrying the weight of that question himself. He doesn't elaborate, doesn't offer a story, but he doesn't leave either. He leans against the counter, watching her, and she feels it again, that pull, like he's part of this whether he wants to be or not. "What's got you asking?" he says, and it's the first time he's pushed, even a little, into the space she's kept guarded. She holds up the locket, lets it dangle between them, the E catching the light. "Found this with some letters my mom wrote. To a man I never heard of. And my dad, he's not talking." Her voice cracks, just a little, and she hates it, hates how raw she feels, but Caleb doesn't flinch. He steps closer, close enough that she can smell the earth on him, the faint tang of motor oil, and looks at the locket like it's something he needs to understand. "What's his name?" he asks, and there's a quiet intensity in his voice, like he's asking more than he's saying. "Eli," she answers, watching him closely, searching for any sign that the name means something to him. For a moment, she thinks she sees it, a flicker, a tightening of his jaw, a shadow crossing his face. But it's gone as quickly as it came, and he's just Caleb again, steady and unreadable. "Sounds like a lot to carry," he says, his tone gentle but firm, like he's acknowledging the weight without trying to lift it for her. She wants to ask if he knows something, if he's holding back, but the words stick. Instead, she sets the locket down, her fingers brushing the letter beneath it, and says, "Feels like I'm finding out who my mom really was. And maybe who my dad isn't." It's more than she meant to say, but it's out now, and Caleb doesn't look away. He moves to the table, pulls out a chair, and sits across from her, his hands resting on the wood, scarred and strong. "Sometimes the people we love keep things from us to keep us safe," he says, his voice low, like he's speaking from a place he doesn't visit often. "Doesn't mean they're not who we think." She searches his face, looking for a crack, a hint of what he's not saying, but all she finds is that same quiet strength that's been anchoring her these past weeks. "You sound like you know what that's like," she says, and it's not a question, not really. He doesn't answer, just holds her gaze, and in that moment, she feels like he's seeing her, really seeing her, in a way no one else has. The silence stretches, not uncomfortable but charged, like the air before a storm. She notices the way his hands shift, the way his thumb traces a scar on his knuckles, and she wonders what stories those hands could tell. She thinks of the letters, of her mother's words about Eli, about love that came at the wrong time, and she wonders if Caleb's ever known something like that, if he's running from it, or toward it. "Thanks for staying," she says finally, not sure if she means today or all the days before, and he nods, a small, almost imperceptible gesture that feels like a promise. He stands, grabbing his wrench, but before he leaves, he looks back at her, his eyes catching hers in a way that makes her breath catch. "If you need to talk," he says, "I'm not far." And then he's gone, the door closing softly behind him, leaving Sarah with the letters, the locket, and a growing certainty that Caleb's tied to this, to her family, to the land, to the truth, in ways she's only beginning to glimpse. Sarah's alone again in the kitchen, the locket resting on the table like a silent accusation, its tiny photograph hidden but heavy in her mind. The letters are still there, her mother's words a maze she's been wandering through all day, each one pulling her closer to a truth she's not sure she's ready to face. Eli's name has become a pulse in her thoughts, steady and unrelenting, and her father's reaction, his trembling hands, his refusal to meet her eyes, has only made it louder. She's been trying to piece it together, to understand why her mother wrote those letters, why her father's carrying a photograph that seems to burn him every time he touches it. But now, with Caleb's words lingering in the air, sometimes the people we love keep things from us to keep us safe, she's starting to wonder if the truth isn't just about her mother, but about everyone around her. She picks up another letter, her fingers careful, like she's handling something that might shatter. This one's different, shorter, more fragmented, as if her mother wrote it in a hurry. It's dated a year before Sarah was born, and it's not addressed to Eli but to Henry, her father. The words are raw, full of love but laced with fear. I told him I chose you, and I meant it. But he's still out there, Henry, and I'm scared he'll come back, not for me, but for what we've built. Sarah's breath catches, her mind racing. Who was her mother afraid of? Eli? Someone else? And what did she mean by what we've built? The land? Their family? Something more. She's so lost in the letter that she doesn't hear the truck pull up, doesn't notice until the door opens and Henry steps inside, his face pale, his eyes haunted. He's been out in the barn too long, longer than it takes to check for a storm, and the way he's standing, shoulders hunched, hands clenched, tells her something's shifted. He sees the letter in her hand, and this time, he doesn't look away. "You're still reading those," he says, his voice rough, like he's been arguing with himself for hours. She nods, setting the letter down, and watches him, waiting for the crack she knows is coming. "Dad, what was Mom scared of?" she asks, her voice steady despite the knot in her chest. Who was she talking about in these? Henry's face tightens, and for a moment, she thinks he'll shut down again, retreat behind the wall he's built over the years. But then he moves to the table, pulls out a chair, and sits, his hands flat on the wood like he's bracing himself. "Your mother was complicated," he says, each word slow, deliberate. "She loved fiercely, but she carried things she didn't always share, even with me." Sarah leans forward, her heart pounding. "Like Eli?" she says, and the name lands like a spark in dry grass. Henry flinches, just slightly, but it's enough to confirm what she's been suspecting. Eli wasn't just a passing figure in her mother's life. "He was someone she met before me," Henry says, his voice low, almost a whisper. "They were close, for a while. But she chose me, Sarah. She chose us." There's a plea in his words, a need for her to believe him, but Sarah's not ready to let it go. "Then why was she scared he'd come back?" she presses, holding up the letter. "She wrote this to you. She said he might come for what you built." What did she mean? Henry's hands clench, his knuckles white, and she sees it, the moment he breaks, the wall crumbling under the weight of her question. "She was scared because Eli wasn't just anyone," he says, his voice cracking. "He was tied to this land, to the people who owned it before us. Your mother, she got caught up in something bigger than she realized when she met him. When she chose me, she thought it was over, but he didn't let go easily." Sarah's mind reels, trying to make sense of it. The land? Was Eli one of the developers her mother fought against? Or something else, someone with a claim, a grudge, a piece of the past that never fully died? "Did he come back?" she asks, her voice barely above a whisper. Henry looks at her, his eyes wet, and nods. "Once," he says. "And I made sure he left for good." The words hit her like a punch, and she leans back, her breath shallow. "What did you do?" she asks, not sure she wants the answer but needing it all the same. Henry's silent for a long moment, his gaze distant, like he's seeing that day again. "I didn't hurt him," he says finally. "But I made it clear he wasn't welcome. I told him to stay away from her, from us, from this place. He listened. Or I thought he did." There's a tremor in his voice, a doubt that makes Sarah's skin prickle. She thinks of the waitress in the diner, of the words that shook her father to his core, and wonders if Eli's shadow is longer than Henry realized. She's about to ask more when there's a noise outside, a low rumble, not thunder but something mechanical, like a motorcycle starting up. It's Caleb, she realizes, and the thought of him pulls her back to the present, to the man who's been working beside her, carrying his own secrets. She looks at her father, who's staring at the table, lost in his own memories, and feels a surge of urgency. "Dad," she says, her voice sharper now, "is there something about Caleb I should know?" Henry's head snaps up, his eyes narrowing, and for a moment, she sees it, a flash of fear, not for her but for something he can't control. "Why do you ask?" he says, too quickly, and it's the first time she's certain he's hiding something about the man who's been saving her land. She doesn't answer, not yet, but her mind is racing, connecting dots she didn't see before, the way Caleb seems to know the land like it's part of him, the way her father watches him with a mix of gratitude and suspicion. The locket, the letters, Eli's name, they're all threads in a tapestry she's only beginning to glimpse, and Caleb, she's starting to think, might be the one holding the needle. Sarah's question about Caleb hangs in the air, unanswered, as the rumble of his motorcycle fades into the distance. Her father's face is a storm of emotions, fear, guilt, something darker she can't name, and it's enough to make her heart pound. The kitchen feels smaller, the letters and locket on the table no longer just relics but pieces of a truth that's unraveling faster than she can grasp. Henry's still staring at the spot where her question landed, his hands gripping the edge of the table like it's the only thing keeping him steady. She wants to push, to demand why he reacted that way, but the weight of what he's already told her, about Eli, about her mother's fear, about a man who came back once and was sent away, holds her back. She's standing on the edge of something vast, and one wrong step could send her tumbling. "Dad," she says again, softer this time, trying to pull him back from wherever his mind's gone. "What aren't you telling me?" Her voice is steady, but inside, she's a mess of questions, about Eli, about the land, about Caleb, about the waitress who shook her father so badly he's still not himself. Henry exhales, a ragged sound, and finally meets her eyes. "There's things I've done, Sarah," he says, his voice low, almost broken. "Things I thought were right at the time. To protect your mother, to protect you. But I'm starting to think I got it wrong." It's not an answer, not really, but it's the closest he's come to admitting there's more to this story than he's let on. She leans forward, the locket catching her eye, its glinting like a warning. "Did you get it wrong about Eli?" she asks, her voice trembling now, because she's not just asking about the past, she's asking about the man sitting across from her, the father she's trusted her whole life. Henry's face crumples, and for a moment, she thinks he'll shut down again, retreat behind the wall he spent years building. But then he reaches into his pocket, pulls out the photograph of her mother, and sets it on the table, his fingers lingering on its worn edges. "Eli wasn't just someone she knew," he says, each word heavy, like it's costing him something to say. "He was part of her life before me, yes, but he was trouble, Sarah. Not because of who he was, but because of what he wanted." She frowns, trying to follow. "The land?" she asks, remembering her mother's letter, the fear of Eli coming back for what they'd built. Henry nods, but it's not the whole truth. She can see it in the way his eyes flicker, like he's holding back a piece of the puzzle. "The land, and more," he says. "Your mother and I, we fought for this place, but Eli, he thought he had a claim to it, through her. When she chose me, he didn't take it well. I thought he was gone for good, but now," he trails off, his gaze drifting to the window, where the evening's turning gray, heavy with the promise of rain. "Now what?" Sarah presses, her voice sharper, because she's tired of half-answers, tired of feeling like she's chasing shadows. Henry looks at her, and she sees it, a raw, unguarded pain that makes her chest ache. "Now I think he's back," he says, so quietly she almost misses it. "Or someone who knows what happened is." The words hit her like a cold wave, and she thinks of the waitress, of the diner, of the way her father's been unraveling since that night. The waitress, she says, not a question but a realization, and Henry's nod is all the confirmation she needs. She knew things, Sarah, he says, his voice breaking. Things I never told anyone, not even your mother. About Eli, about what I did to make him leave. She leans back, her mind racing, trying to piece it together. What did you do? She asks, her voice barely above a whisper, because she's not sure she wants to know but can't stop herself from asking. Henry's silent for a long moment, his hands trembling now, the photograph of her mother lying between them like a judge. I didn't hurt him, he says finally, echoing what he told her before, but there's a desperation in it now, like he's trying to convince himself as much as her. I paid him to go. Gave him everything I had saved, told him it was for her, for us. He took it and left. But I think he never stopped watching. Sarah's breath catches, her mind reeling. Paid him? Her father, who's fought for every inch of this land, who's never had more than they needed, gave everything to a man who loved her mother. She looks at the locket, at the photograph inside, and feels a surge of questions she can't voice. Why didn't you tell Mom? She asks, because it's the only one she can manage. Henry's eyes well up, and he shakes his head. Because I was ashamed, he says. Ashamed I couldn't make him leave without money, ashamed I didn't trust her enough to tell her. And then she was gone, and it was too late. The kitchen feels like it's shrinking, the walls closing in as Sarah tries to process what he's saying. Eli, her mother, the land, the money, it's all tied together, and now the waitress, and maybe Caleb, are part of it too. She thinks of the way her father looked at Caleb earlier, the suspicion in his eyes, and a new fear takes root. Is he connected to Eli? She asks, her voice shaking, because it's the only thing that makes sense of her father's wariness, of Caleb's quiet knowing. Henry's face goes still, and for a moment, she thinks he won't answer. Then he says, I don't know, Sarah. But there's something about him, something that feels like it's not a coincidence. She stands, the chair scraping against the floor, because she can't sit still anymore, can't let this truth settle without doing something. I need to talk to him, she says, more to herself than to her father, and heads for the door, the locket still on the table, the letters fluttering slightly in the breeze. Henry calls after her, his voice urgent, Sarah, wait. But she's already outside, the air cool against her skin, the sound of rain starting to patter in the distance. She doesn't know what she'll say to Caleb, doesn't know if he's part of this or just caught in its shadow, but she knows she can't wait any longer to find out. The rain's coming down now, soft at first, a gentle patter against the earth, but Sarah barely notices as she steps off the porch, her boots sinking into the damp grass. Her heart's racing, her father's words still ringing in her ears, Eli, the money, the waitress, and now Caleb, tangled in a web of secrets she's only just beginning to unravel. The locket and letters are back in the kitchen, but their weight follows her, heavy as the questions she's carrying. She's not sure where Caleb is, his motorcycle was gone when she stepped outside, but she needs to find him, needs to look him in the eye and ask if he's part of this, if he's been hiding something all along. The thought of it twists her stomach, because he's been her anchor these past weeks, the one steady thing in a world that's been crumbling. If he's not who she thinks, she's not sure what she'll do. She heads toward the barn, the rain picking up, soaking her hair and shoulders. The air smells of wet earth and pine, and it grounds her, keeps her moving forward even as her mind spins. She thinks of her father, still in the kitchen, his face raw with shame and fear, admitting he paid Eli to leave, admitting he's been running from that choice ever since. She thinks of her mother, who loved two men in different ways, who chose a life with Henry but left behind letters that feel like a confession. And she thinks of Caleb, his quiet strength, his scarred hands, the way he seems to know the land like it's part of him. Could he be connected to Eli? To her mother? The idea feels impossible, but her father's suspicion, his hesitation when she asked about Caleb, makes it hard to dismiss. The barn's dark when she reaches it, the door creaking as she pushes it open. Inside, it's quiet except for the rain tapping the roof, the air thick with the scent of hay and old wood. She calls Caleb's name, her voice echoing, but there's no answer. She steps further in, her eyes adjusting to the dimness, and notices something, a jacket slung over a crate, one she's seen Caleb wear. It's not proof of anything, but it's enough to make her pause, to wonder why he'd leave it here, why he'd leave it all without saying goodbye. She runs her hand over the leather, worn and soft, and feels a pang of something she can't name, hope, maybe, or dread. She's about to turn back when she hears footsteps behind her, heavy against the wet ground. It's her father, his silhouette framed in the doorway, his face shadowed but tense. "Sarah," he says, his voice rough, "you can't just run off like that. Not now." She turns to face him, the rain dripping from her hair, and feels a surge of frustration. "I need to know, Dad," she says, her voice sharper than she means it to be. "If Caleb's part of this, whatever this is, I need to hear it from him." Henry steps inside, his hands raised like he's trying to calm her, but there's a desperation in his eyes that only fuels her resolve. "You don't understand," he says. "If he's tied to Eli, if he knows what I did, it's not just about us anymore. It's about the land, about everything we've fought for." She shakes her head, backing away. "Then tell me everything," she says, her voice breaking. "No more half-truths, no more secrets. Who was Eli to Mom? Why does Caleb matter so much?" Henry's silent for a moment, the rain a steady drumbeat between them, and then he sighs, a sound that carries years of regret. "Eli wasn't just a man she loved," he says, his voice low, almost lost in the storm. "He was her brother, Sarah. Your mother's brother. And I sent him away because I thought he'd destroy us." The words hit her like a blow, stealing her breath. Her mother's brother. Not a lover, not a rival, but family, family her mother never spoke of, family her father paid to disappear. "Why?" she whispers, her voice trembling. "Why would you do that?" Henry's face is a map of pain, his eyes wet with tears he's not trying to hide. "Because he wasn't like her," he says. "He was angry, reckless, tied to people who wanted this land for themselves. Your mother thought she could save him, but I saw what he was doing to her, to us. I gave him money to start over, to leave her in peace. I thought it was the only way." Sarah's mind reels, trying to reconcile this new truth with the letters, with the locket, with the mother she thought she knew. Eli wasn't a threat because he loved her mother, he was a threat because he was her family, and her father chose to cut him out. She thinks of Caleb again, of the way her father's been watching him, and a new fear takes hold. "Is Caleb, is he Eli's son?" she asks, the question spilling out before she can stop it. Henry's eyes widen, and for a moment, she thinks she's hit the mark, but then he shakes his head, his voice hoarse. "I don't know, Sarah. But the way he moves, the way he talks, it's like seeing Eli all over again. And if he is, if he knows what I did, he doesn't finish, but he doesn't need to." She feels it, the fear that Caleb's not just here for her, for the land, but for something deeper, something tied to a choice her father made decades ago. She turns away, her hands clenched, the rain louder now, a roar that matches the chaos in her chest. She wants to find Caleb, to confront him, but more than that, she wants to understand why her father's carried this alone, why her mother kept Eli's name alive in those letters. "I'm going to find him," she says, not looking back, because if she does, she's afraid she'll see her father break completely. Henry calls after her, his voice swallowed by the storm, but she's already moving, out of the barn, into the rain, her boots splashing through puddles as she heads for the road. She doesn't know where Caleb's gone, doesn't know if he's carrying Eli's legacy or just his own pain, but she knows she can't stop now, not when the truth is so close, not when it's tearing her family apart. The rain's a steady curtain now, blurring the world as Sarah walks down the dirt road, her boots heavy with mud, her heart heavier still. The truth her father spilled in the barn, Eli is her mother's brother, not her lover, a man sent away with money and shame, has shifted everything she thought she knew. It's not just about the land anymore, or even her mother's secrets. It's about a family fractured by choices, about a past that's reaching into the present like roots breaking through stone. She's looking for Caleb, driven by a need to know if he's tied to Eli, if his quiet presence these past weeks has been more than chance. The rain soaks her through, but she doesn't care. She's chasing something bigger than comfort, something that might finally make sense of the chaos. The road stretches toward town, and she's not sure where she's going, only that Caleb's motorcycle was headed this way before the storm broke. Her mind replays her father's words, his fear that Caleb might be Eli's son, might know the truth about what Henry did. She thinks of the locket, the letters, the way Caleb's hands move with a familiarity that started to feel like memory. She wants to believe he's just a drifter, a man who stayed because he saw her fight and wanted to help. But doubt has taken root, and it's growing with every step, every drop of rain that slides down her face. She reaches the edge of town, where the diner's neon sign glows faintly through the storm, a beacon in the gray. Something pulls her toward it, maybe instinct, maybe fate, and she steps inside, the bell above the door jingling softly. The place is nearly empty, just a trucker in the corner and the waitress from her father's story wiping down the counter. Sarah's breath catches when she sees her, the woman who shook Henry with words no stranger should know. The waitress looks up, her eyes sharp but not unkind, and nods toward a booth in the back. "He's over there," she says, her voice low, like she's been expecting Sarah all along. Sarah turns, and there's Caleb, sitting alone, a cup of coffee untouched before him. His jacket's damp, his hair slick with rain, and he looks up as she approaches, his face unreadable but his eyes steady, like he's been waiting for her too. She slides into the booth across from him, her hands trembling, not from the cold but from the weight of what she's about to ask. "Caleb," she says, her voice raw, "who are you?" It's not the question she planned, but it's the one that matters, the one that's been building since the barn, since the locket, since her father's confession. He doesn't answer right away, just looks at her, his gaze searching her face like he's trying to memorize it. "I'm just a man trying to do right," he says finally, but there's a crack in his voice, a hint of something deeper. She shakes her head, leaning forward, her hands flat on the table. "That's not enough anymore. My dad thinks you're tied to someone from my mom's past. Someone named Eli. Tell me he's wrong." The name hangs between them, heavy as the rain outside, and she watches him closely, looking for the flicker she saw before, the one that made her think he knew more than he let on. Caleb's jaw tightens, and for a moment, she thinks he'll shut down, walk away like he's done every time she's gotten too close. But then he reaches into his pocket, pulls out a small, worn photograph, and slides it across the table. It's old, faded, but Sarah recognizes her mother instantly, younger, smiling, standing next to a man who could only be Eli, his eyes the same shape as Caleb's. Her heart stops, and she looks up at him, her voice barely a whisper. "You're his son." It's not a question, not anymore, and Caleb's nod is slow, deliberate, like he's been carrying this truth for years and is only now setting it down. "He was my father," Caleb says, his voice low, steady despite the weight of it. "But I didn't come here for revenge, Sarah. I came because I wanted to know her, the woman he loved, the sister he lost. And then I met you, and I saw you fighting for this land, for her memory, and I couldn't walk away." His words hit her like a wave, washing away the doubt and leaving something raw in its place. She thinks of her father, of the money he paid to send Eli away, of the shame that's been eating him alive. She thinks of her mother, who kept her brother's name alive in those letters, even when he was gone. "Why didn't you tell me?" she asks, her voice breaking, because it's not just about Eli, it's about the weeks they've spent together, the trust she thought they'd built. Caleb looks down, his hands clenching around the coffee cup. "Because I didn't want to be his shadow," he says. "I wanted to be someone you could rely on, not another secret you had to carry." She feels tears prick her eyes, not from anger but from the ache of understanding what it must have cost him to stay silent, to work beside her knowing who he was. The diner's quiet, the waitress watching from a distance, and Sarah feels the world shift, the pieces of her family's past falling into place. She reaches across the table, her hand covering his, and it's not forgiveness, not yet, but it's a start. You saved more than the land, she says, her voice soft but sure. You saved me. Caleb's eyes meet hers, and there's a flicker of something, hope, maybe, or relief, and he doesn't pull away. Outside, the rain slows, the storm breaking as the truth settles between them. They sit there, hands touching, the photograph of her mother and Eli between them, a bridge across years of loss. Sarah doesn't know what comes next, if her father can face Caleb knowing who he is, if the land will stay hers, if the past will ever stop haunting them. But in this moment, she feels it, a quiet strength, not just from Caleb but from herself, from the mother who loved fiercely and the brother she never knew. The diner's neon hums, the waitress turns away, and Sarah holds on, knowing that whatever's ahead, she's not alone anymore.